Hey everyone, I'm Phil Thompson. I'm joined here by my coworker Taylor McCormick, formerly known as Taylor West, in case you're confused. This is essentially our take on how to help self-care of mental health. Okay, so we want to differentiate between self-care through like lifestyle change, mainly exercise is what we're going to talk about today, and needing professional help. With that said, let's get started. First, we're going to talk about the relationship between mental health and physical health. And when it comes to mental health and physical health, there's a few things that we do know, but even more that we probably don't know. One of the things that we do know is that the prevalence of common mental disorders is on the rise among all populations, and we can probably argue ad nauseum the cause of a lot of this between social media, oversaturation of dopamine, everybody getting their dopamine drips from Amazon boxes, likes, and shares, to still recovering from all the COVID stuff. So we also know that mood disorders are associated with higher rates of infectious diseases, respiratory problems, and weight problems. There is a strong link between mental and physical health. We know that there are strong cross effects between physical and mental health, even after controlling for certain variables like socioeconomic or educational background. And we know that studies have found a link between chronic stress and anxiety disorders as well as major depressive disorders. So we know that chronic stress can lead to increases in anxiety and depression. What we don't know is essentially what happens first. Okay, do we have a decrease in mental health that leads to decrease in physical health, or vice versa? Does it matter? Probably not. Okay, what's more importantly is how they're related. Is it direct or indirect? Is it a direct cause that if your mental health drops, your physical health drops, or vice versa? Or is it more of an indirect? We don't know. They'll probably never know. It's very difficult to study mental health due to the subjective nature of it. So right now, what I'd like you to do is do like a small self-examination. If this was live, this is the part where we have to do a college icebreaker exercise that everybody loves so much. But luckily, we're all at peace at our own homes doing this. What I'd like you to do is right now, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being great, 0 or 1 being horrible, rate your physical health right now on a scale of 1 to 10. And I'd like you to do the same for your mental health right now. Chances are, I bet you those two numbers correlate within 1 or 2 of each other. And it makes a lot of sense, right? How could you feel good mentally if you don't feel great physically, right? If you're feeling horrible, if you're feeling sick, or if you have lots of chronic disease or a lot of issues going on physically, it'd be hard mentally to have a really great outlook on things, right? So now I want you to think back to a time where you feel like your physical health was great, where it was maybe 8, 9, or 10. Try to think back about what your mental health was back then as well. Once again, I'm willing to bet that those two numbers are within 1 or 2 of each other. So again, we might not know what declines first when it comes to physical health and mental health, but it might not matter. The common theme right now, I know because I've been a health coach for 3 years, I worked in bariatrics for a few years and been personal training for close to 20, is a lot of individuals have this idea that if they have poor mental health right now, they can't exercise. That they're going to wait to exercise until they essentially fix or improve their mental health. And I've noticed that individuals that kind of look at it the other way, if they focus on their physical health, they'll typically see large improvements in their mental health. So what we feel here, at least Taylor and I, and a lot of other individuals here at Connect Care 3, is that your focal point should be focusing on your physical health to improve your mental health. A big reason for this is, like I said, mental health is so subjective. It's how you feel month to month, week to week, day to day, moment to moment, right? It's how you feel in that current moment. And we all know, like, one bad thing happens, a flat tire, out of gas, cold day, and that can essentially, put a mental damper on you for like a small period of time, right? Focusing on your physical health gives you objective variables to focus on, and you can see what you're doing is working, right? So that's why it's tough between mental health, because you can't really see immediate effects or even concrete objective increases in variables of how, if what you're doing is working or improving your mental health. On the other hand, physical health that there is. So if you have a chronic disease, if you focus on your physical health, you'll see improvements in your blood pressure, your blood sugar levels, you'll start dropping weight, not to mention performance variables. Like if you're doing a resistance training program, you'll see that the amount of weight you can lift is increasing, the amount of reps you can do is increasing. So you see whatever you're doing is translating to improvement. That alone gives you a lot of feedback knowing what you're doing is working, and that's huge. Not only physically, but mentally, knowing that you're doing something that's in your control and you're seeing improvement. So moving right along, current research is tough. When I talk research, I talk real research. I was lucky enough to find what's called a meta-analysis. So what a meta-analysis is, essentially, someone kind of did the work for me in terms of going through the research and seeing what literature was a little bit more worthwhile than others. And the problem with research is they don't typically keep all the same variables. So every one of these, of the 7 here, they all have similar variables, but they weren't done exactly the same way. So that's why they'll still get results that might be a little bit different. So, but at least all these studies met what was considered quality research criteria. All 7 demonstrate that resistance training is a meaningful intervention for people suffering from anxiety. Huge, right? Because that's the blanket aspect of things, and that's what you should concentrate when it comes to this stuff. What we don't want to concentrate on is every individual variable, looking at like the bottom here. So 2 of those 7 studies compared the effects of high intensity resistance training, so doing resistance training at 80% of your 1 rep max versus doing moderate intensity, being 50-60% of your 1 rep max, and found that anxiety was better reduced with the moderate intensity resistance training. That is so highly individualized that it might be different for you. That you don't want to take that aspect of the study and be like, all right, well, I want to do 50-60% of a 1 rep max because that's what's been shown to work. It could be very different for you because it's highly individualized in terms of how bad your anxiety is and what you feel better doing. And that's going to be a big thing going forward when we talk about depression as well. So once again, I found a meta-analysis for resistance training proving depression. There are 18 studies in this meta-analysis examining the effect of resistance training in people with symptoms of depression. There's a lot more than 18 studies looking at this topic, but they found these 18 were at least mildly similar. So not every variable was the same, but at least majority of them were. That's why they kind of lumped it into this meta-analysis. So as soon as you read that there's mixed results, you start thinking, all right, well, maybe it doesn't work. Well, it's highly dependent on different variables in those studies. So several of the studies show a significant positive effect from resistance training, while others have shown little to no change. The difference in these studies is the frequency, intensity, and volume of training. Some of these studies did 2 training workouts a week, others did 4, 5, 6. Okay, they did them at different intensities and different volumes. Volume being like essentially how long you were there, not necessarily time, because you can go and sit in a gym for an hour and do 1 exercise. Doesn't mean you're in a gym for an hour. So volume means the amount of sets or reps you've done. So all those variables weren't the same. And that is, again, going to be highly individualized. It means that there's probably an optimal dose for you, meaning you want to try different things. If you've never resistance trained before, maybe start with 2 or 3 and see how you feel off of that. If you feel really good off of that, maybe you stick to that. Maybe you have to do 4 or 5. Most people won't have to do 7. That would be somebody for probably if they have some severe mental stress. In this meta-analysis, there's also 4 studies that investigated the effect of resistance training with clinically diagnosed depressed adults. And luckily, in those 4 studies, the results were unanimous, that there were large reductions in depression from resistance training participation. Why resistance training and exercise in general is so effective for anxiety and depression is, there's direct and indirect reasons why. Direct reasons why are the fact that, again, that control thing. You start seeing improvement in something. You start feeling better about yourself. You start feeling you have more control over your life. And that's easy to lose touch in right now. You start looking around how you spend your time. It's like, I have to spend 8, 9, 10 hours at work, 8 hours of sleep, 2 hours commuting. You start thinking about how many hours of my life are actually lived for me, right? So how much control can you really feel? This helps give you more control over some things in your life by taking control of your physical health. doing that will give you improvements in your mental health, that you have more control. Not to mention seeing increases in your health parameters, like we said about improvements in your chronic diseases, right? Start losing a little bit of weight, right? Start seeing drops in blood pressure. Not to mention, resistance training will have the most direct effects on how your clothes fit and the shape of your body, right? That's going to improve your confidence. Improved confidence usually helps with the type of mental health issues you have going on, right? Of course it does. So in case you weren't sure, I think most people now know what resistance training is. It's strength training, it's weight training, it's using any type of muscular tension to push, pull, or lift against resistance, weight, or force. Typically, when we think resistance training, we typically think athletes, we think performance benefits. And you might be thinking, well, I don't need to be an athlete. I don't need performance benefits. Well, if you think about it this way, the stuff that we do to make healthy people into athletes are the same things that we do to turn unhealthy people into healthy people, just at a different rate and magnitude, right? So by focusing on these performance benefits, it gives you some of the objective variables, the objective feedback, and it will translate directly to typical improvements in mental health. So you're seeing things like strength and power, right? So how does strength and power, or all these, how do they translate into increases in mental health? Well, one, they directly affect your health benefits, we talked about, but also the two in the bottom there, activities of daily living and quality of life. Two huge aspects that play a huge role in mental health. So activities of daily living are essentially the things you have to do every day. So your chores, your walking, your whatever, carrying groceries, vacuuming, gardening, anything else that you crazy kids are up to these days in terms of activities of daily living. But the easier those are, the easier your everyday stress will be, right? So things like I said, vacuuming, gardening, carrying groceries, putting things up in cabinets. By doing a resistance training program, we try to have our exercises translate to those type of movements, or at least have a balanced approach in terms of working the muscles that you'll use every day in those movements, because we want those movements to be easy as possible. If your everyday chores and movements are much easier and less taxing, do you think that's going to decrease your stress? Of course it is. Is that going to improve your quality of life? Absolutely. Are those two things going to likely have large impacts on improving your mental health? Yeah, of course. So you think of strength, right? I don't need to be that strong. Well, yes, you do. Now, maybe not, but strength will always be highly beneficial as we age. We know muscle and strength usually decrease as we age. Think in terms of carrying groceries. Okay, don't lie to yourself. You do not carry one bag at a time. You load up and try and make as few trips as possible. The stronger you are, the more bags you can carry, less trips you can take, making that an easier task. Power, yeah, you might not have a lot of sense of power, but believe it or not, power plays a huge role as we age in terms of falling. I don't want to get too much into the mechanics of that. I have another webinar that speaks about the importance of resistance training for health and longevity. If you want to go into our website under our resources page and check that out, I would strongly recommend it. Hypertrophy is increases in muscle size. That translates really well because we know as we age, we start losing muscle tissue. So trying to put on as much muscle now as we can and try to hold on to it as we age, it's going to make our life much easier. It essentially is the fountain of youth. The more I research it, the more muscle tissue you have, the healthier the person typically is. Endurance, so being able to walk and do some of these activities for longer periods of time. Again, leading all to improvements of quality of life and activity of daily living. Coordination, speed, agility. All right, so you might not need to be super fast or agile, but it could be helpful, right? If you're carrying those groceries around puddles, right? If you see a big puddle coming up and you don't have the agility, you just start already knowing that you're just going to have to walk straight through that puddle. Nobody likes wet socks. I hate wet socks. Balance, again, that's a huge thing as we age, but that's typically because there's a direct relationship between balance and strength. The stronger your legs are, the more balance you'll have. Again, all these performance benefits translate to these health benefits. And resistance training can really help in preventing, managing, and possibly reversing a lot of these health detriments that we see as we age. So coronary artery disease. Everybody thinks for heart health you have to do cardiovascular exercise, long, tedious trips on the treadmill and the elliptical, right? No, you don't. Part of the heart, if you split it up into 4 sections, you have the left ventricle. That's probably the most vital aspect of the heart because that's what pumps the blood to the rest of the heart. So resistance training puts a large demand on that and has shown that it increases in left ventricular strength and size, right? Helping improve our body's ability to pump blood to the rest of the body. Right? That's going to help prevent coronary artery disease. Sarcopenia and osteoporosis is a loss of muscle tissue and bone as we age. Resistance training is the only thing that's really going to help with these two. Okay, cardiovascular adaptations can be very beneficial, but with these two in particular, not going to be very helpful. When loss of muscle tissue, we have to resistance train to kind of build up that muscle tissue. We have to give our body a reason to keep that. Osteoporosis, same thing. Only the bone we stimulate is the bone will keep. And it typically has to be done with heavier loads. So walking and running might help a little bit with just the bones of the lower body, but after a period of time, they'll respond to that and just stay right where they are. You can't see any increases. Okay, but then what about upper body, especially spine? The spine, right? That's a big one. That's the one we want to protect the most, right? We can only hit those other areas by doing resistance training. Resistance training will show decreases in your triglyceride levels and your blood pressure. In terms of diabetes, muscle is a huge aspect of helping with type 2 diabetes. The reason for this is the majority of the carbohydrates we store is in the muscle tissue. What that means is the more muscle tissue we have, the more carbohydrates we can eat and get stored in the muscle tissue, meaning less in the blood. Resistance training is also hugely effective at using that blood glucose, or using glucose in general, right? So if you're performing resistance training, you're hitting it from both ends. Not only are you using a lot of carbohydrates, emptying the muscle, meaning the muscle could take up more carbohydrates, but you're also building that tissue to allow yourself to eat more carbohydrates. Anyone out there with type 2 diabetes, any of you have any interest in eating more carbohydrates and keeping your blood sugar levels level? Yeah, I thought so. Hugely beneficial, right? We have an entire web series on diabetes management. I would really consider going on our website and looking at those, at least looking at the exercise one. I believe it's 4 or 5, talking more in depth about that entire aspect of things. Resistance training is also huge for obesity. We have a 3-part mini-series all dedicated to that. The first one is the truth about fat loss. The second one is exercise considerations for fat loss. And the third one is nutritional considerations for fat loss. Resistance training is the key to that. And I know what you're thinking. Oh, well, I think just burning calories, is the aspect of losing weight. Losing weight maybe, but we're talking about losing fat. Right? And I go in depth about how resistance training helps not only lose fat, but more importantly, keep it off. Okay? I'm not going to talk much more about that. Actually, I'm not going to talk about that at all right now. Please go look at those webinars. Again, resistance training helps build up your higher metabolism because more muscle tissue and helps support your joints. Right? The reason why your joints hurt so much is because you're putting a lot of stress on them because your muscle is weak. The stronger your muscles are around the joints, the more of the stress it takes off your joints. Okay. With that said, I'll turn it over to Taylor to talk about the fascinating world of cardiovascular training.
So far, you have heard about the impact resistance training can have on anxiety and depression, but what about cardiovascular activity? Luckily, research has been done in this area as well. I found a meta-analysis that analyzed the impact of cardiovascular exercise on anxiety levels. And of the various 15 studies that were identified, 9 had participants with clinically diagnosed anxiety levels, and the additional 6 studies had participants with increased levels of anxiety. To be included in the meta-analysis, participants had to participate in at least a 2-week cardiovascular training program at either high intensity, which is about 60% of your heart rate max, or low intensity. These were compared to either those on a waiting list for treatment or those who participated in low intensity exercise when compared to high intensity. It was discovered that individuals who participated in cardiovascular training saw an improvement in symptoms related to anxiety compared to those who did not participate in cardiovascular training. And this really confirms that cardiovascular training can be an effective tool when managing anxiety levels. Unfortunately, though, it is unclear at which intensity cardiovascular training is the most beneficial. It is believed that high-intensity training may have more of an impact than lower intensity. However, this remains unclear due to the limited number of studies and also the variation in exercise regimens that are used. Again, I stuck with the common theme of finding a meta-analysis, this one looking at the impact of cardiovascular training on depression. This one examined 23 other studies with participants who were diagnosed with depression. And in this analysis, individuals who participated in cardiovascular training were compared to those who were either on a wait list or opting not to receive your traditional form of treatment. When comparing the two, it was found that cardiovascular exercise was an effective treatment helping to alleviate symptoms related to depression. Again, it can be seen as an alternative for patients not responding to your particular treatment, either on a wait list or those who are wishing to not participate or receive traditional forms of treatment. Additionally, for individuals who are using traditional treatment therapies, cardiovascular exercise can be an effective means to supplement your traditional treatment. And want to really emphasize in sharing this information, our goal is to not promote exercise as the sole means of treatment for depression, and it's really important to seek help from a mental health professional when additional support is indicated. Just like resistance training, cardiovascular training has many benefits when it comes to your physical health. Some, as you will see, are very similar to those of resistance training, and others, on the other hand, may be slightly different. So we're all familiar with the concept of cardiovascular training. When you hear the word cardio, you may think about walking outside or spending hours on that treadmill, using an elliptical, biking, or swimming. And when you participate in cardiovascular activity, you're training your circulatory system, which is made up of your heart and blood vessels, and your respiratory system, which is made up of your lungs, to deliver oxygen and remove waste products from your muscles during physical activity. So if you've ever started training consistently and then notice over time that that same workout becomes easier and you're able to run faster and farther, this is your cardiovascular system becoming more efficient. Let's say you're starting to train for your first 5K. Those first few workouts, maybe running half a mile, is very challenging, it's daunting, and you stop, you have to take a couple breaks, which is okay. Fast forward a few months and you're building up your mileage and that run becomes a lot more doable and enjoyable. This is your cardiovascular system adapting to the training and becoming more efficient. And as mentioned earlier, this is mainly due to left ventricular hypertrophy and the increased ability to pump a larger volume of blood out to your muscles carrying oxygen and different nutrients. And again, we can break cardiovascular training down into two categories, your performance benefits and your health benefits. Performance benefits are more applicable to athletes who have a particular performance goal in mind, such as achieving their personal best for a 5K, or maybe they're training to compete in their first triathlon. On the other hand, health benefits directly relate to a more general population. And I want to emphasize that health benefits are really important in decreasing the risk of chronic diseases that are often attributable to those lifestyle choices that we all make on a daily basis. Starting out looking at performance benefits with training. So you have the ability to increase your muscular endurance or your ability to run faster for longer. And again, you may be sitting here thinking, well, I'm not training for a 5K or I have no desire to go run a marathon, so how does this apply to me? Well, many of these performance benefits overlap with the health benefits that you see on the right side of your screen. By improving certain performance benefits, you're really taking steps in the right direction to mitigate your risk of certain chronic diseases. For example, as we've previously mentioned, an increase in capillary density alleviates pressure by creating new pathways for your blood to travel, which can positively impact hypertension or high blood pressure. Additionally, whereas an increase in oxidative enzyme activity could directly help fight or prevent obesity, what oxidative enzyme activity means is that your body can better utilize fat stores as fuel. And while the body can start to utilize fat more efficiently as fuel, it can also start to store more carbs and fat within the muscle. So at first, this may seem like a negative thing. You're like, wait a minute, I don't want to store anything else. However, it's actually beneficial in helping to manage blood sugar, which is important, again, in managing type 2 diabetes. And lastly, looking at quality of life and activities of daily living. So don't we all want to make things a little bit easier for ourselves on a day-to-day basis? Well, by training our cardiovascular system, we can make activities such as walking, playing with kids or grandkids, gardening, and household activities a little bit easier on ourselves. Not to mention, an increase in aerobic activity is also associated with better quality of sleep, and can't we all benefit from that a little bit more? So a lot of the health benefits we've already touched on, but I just want to point out two others that cardiovascular training can only impact up until a certain point, and these are sarcopenia and osteoporosis. And as discussed earlier, both of these are dependent on progressive overloading, so you'll only see benefits up until a certain point due to your body constantly adjusting to the stress and strain placed on it. And this is really where resistance training can be beneficial in managing both of these conditions, because you're able to keep gradually increasing your load through lifting weights. We hope that you have some takeaways on small steps you can take to improve both your physical and mental well-being. Maybe this is starting a gym routine a few days per week, or adding a walk on Saturday mornings with friends in your neighborhood. It's going to look a little bit different for everyone, and that's okay. We hope that you have a better understanding of how your physical and mental well-being are truly interconnected. And again, as we wrap up today, we really want to emphasize that resistance and cardiovascular training are not meant to replace professional mental health counseling when it's indicated. We want to thank you for joining us today and learning more on how you can take control of your mental well-being through improving your physical health.